Welcome back, everybody. My name is Mia Tuan, and it is my privilege to serve as Dean of the College of Education here at the University of Washington. It is also my job today to serve as a bridge between commemorating the past and envisioning the future. So today is indeed both a culmination as well as an introduction. We gather to celebrate the extraordinary legacy of the Center for Multicultural Education and the man who has led it for the past 26 years. But we also gather to officially welcome the man who will lead it for hopefully the next 26 years, and to reflect forward on the center's work to come. I'd like to start by sharing a few words from Robert F. Kennedy. They come from a speech he gave in South Africa at the heart of apartheid. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. I believe this passage epitomizes our friend and colleague, Jim Banks, and the mighty current he helped set into motion with his teaching and writing about the critical importance of a multicultural education, centering the multiple histories, cultures, and languages of diverse youth. So many of us have been influenced by this concept and the field of study that has grown around it. One need not look very far to see just how many people Jim Banks has inspired during his long career as a scholar, professor, mentor, and leader. As Jim already mentioned, he was the first African American hired in the College of Education 49 years ago, and the first African American to be granted tenure at the University of Washington. And under his leadership, the center has amassed nearly 3 decades of conferences, institutes, lectures, book talks, and courses, all focused on pushing the boundaries of prevailing research and practice. Thank you, Jim, for all you have done to transform inequitable systems of education and to advocate for a just, culturally relevant education for all young people. In 2015, I joined the University of Washington and became Jim's 8th dean at the College of Education. It is my honor to say that I will serve as his last dean before his retirement at the end of the calendar year. One of my primary responsibilities since assuming the deanship has been to work very closely with Jim to ensure that the center's leadership remain in extraordinary hands. With the stakes being very high, I approached the task with great care and thought. And after much exploration, consultation, and negotiation, I am so happy to report that we found our next extraordinary leader in Dr. Django Paris. Dr. Paris joined our faculty this past January and is a renowned scholar whose research focuses on understanding and sustaining languages, literacies, and lifeways among youth of color in the context of demographic and social change. Now, those of you with a discerning eye might notice certain similarities between Jim Banks and Django Paris. First, there is the shared height, although Jim is getting less one, and impressive stature. Then there is the grace and charm that both men exude. I'm pretty confident that Jim would say it's because he's Southern. Django, because you're Jamaican. Both have also been known to wear a jaunty cap on a rainy day, which, alas, in Seattle means probably half the year. And most importantly, there is the keen, path-breaking intellect that both men exude, and the clarity of purpose to advance social justice, improve practice, and make a difference in the lives of young people. Jim, you tasked me with the tall order of finding your successor, someone who would respect the legacy of the center and be bold in launching a new era of local global relevance and impact. Django is that leader that we were searching for. So without further ado, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Django Paris to the podium, the inaugural James A. and Cherry A. Banks Professor of Multicultural Education and the incoming director of the center. I can steal your paper.
Let me look. Okay. No, I got it, yeah. Thank you so much, Mia, and thanks everybody for staying across the day or coming back at this late stage. I'm grateful to be gathered with you all here on the homelands and home waters of the Duwamish and other Coast Salish peoples. And I want to give a special thanks to Jim for, I think it was in the summer, reaching out to me and saying, would you be the closing keynote for the 30th Symposium? So it was many months ago, and just thinking about what that meant and how special it's been to share this time with Jim and with Cherry and with this place and with this work. Thank you, Mia, so much for that introduction and for all your leadership. I also wanted to acknowledge Afro-Peruvian Oakland-based artist Fabiana Rodriguez, whose piece, "We're Building a World We Need." "We're Building the World We Need" graces this first slide. And also, what an amazing day it's been in terms of all the people who have shared their necessary work with us. And I really feel like I'm joining a family. Some of the folks have been family members for a long time, but we are now chosen kin. So I'm so very honored to take on this role as director of the center and to be the inaugural James A. and Cherry A. Banks Professor of Multicultural Education is beyond a dream. I got this formal notice in February and definitely shed some tears. It was a lot. And can we just take a moment to appreciate what a beautiful thing it is for two extraordinary scholars, two Black leaders across the fields of education, to establish a professorship in their name. It's all sorts of goals. So again, what a deep honor. I broke down. I was like, oh God. Because it means so much. And then I looked at the program for today's symposium, and you've seen it. It's this one that's working its way around, which shares some of the expansive work the Center for Multicultural Education has done over the years. Reading about the symposia from youth civic development to improving racial and ethnic relations in school, browsing the list of lecturers, a who's who of scholars in education and equity, from Geneva Gay, whose central contributions to the center and to field building in multicultural education echo across the work of so many of us, to talks by Zeus Leonardo, Tyrone Howard, and so many others. Checking out this list of visiting scholars, Edmund Gordon and Jackie Irvine back in 1992, to this summer's visiting scholar, Gloria Latson-Billings, I was struck by the vastness of the center's contributions to UW and to the field. A few weeks back, when Jim rather nonchalantly handed me this program and said, here are a few things that we've done with the center, I hope he didn't see that I immediately started sweating. So thanks for putting this program together, Jim. I haven't slept since. Since you handed it to me, I just wake up and I'm like, oh God. So about 20 years ago, I was teaching high school English in Tucson, Arizona, and I want to recognize the educators of Arizona who are in the streets demanding fair pay and support. As they work in one of the most important jobs in our society. So Tucson was my third teaching gig. I had been a teacher in Berkeley and the Dominican Republic before that. The Center for Multicultural Education was in its earlier years then, and I remember my principal bringing in an article by a scholar named James A. Banks about types of knowledge in schooling. A couple years later, taking a graduate class at Stanford, I would come across that piece again. As a teacher, I remember working toward that transformative knowledge, and as a graduate student seeking to understand its possibilities. I share this to say that in many ways, I was like so many of us in this room, learning from Jim and the center long before I met him. And this is the actual one from the reader. And you see, I was really big on marginal notes at the time. I wrote, wow, which I think spoke to the ways that this was fundamentally shifting what I valued and understood about education. This brings me, and so as we've heard about today, for so many of us and felt across the years of our work, the Center for Multicultural Education has built the field toward an education that centers, in particular, communities of color across teaching and learning. This brings me to ask, what is the next era of work given the current context of increasingly brazen anti-Black racism, of anti-indigeneity, and continued dispossession, of anti-immigration, anti-Muslim, anti-LGBTQ, ableist, monolingual policies and practices and ideologies, of a blatant disregard for the Earth Mother, which is imperiling all people? And of course, what is the next era of work given the ways communities, including children, and youth in schools, including educators, have always and continue to resist, reclaim, and reimagine what education has been and can be, bringing love and joy and unending hope to the struggle ahead. Beginning this summer with a formal launch in fall 2018, we are pleased that the Center for Multicultural Education will become the Bank Center for Educational Justice, joining the legacy of the Center for Multicultural Education to take the work forward into the next decades. Goes without saying that it's with great pride that we honor the legacy and ongoing work with the bank's name. It looks good, right? And I chose this photo for a reason. This is from last spring's launch of our book, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies, because it embodies so much of my commitments as a scholar, as a leader, and as a person. It's intergenerational. It's coalitional with Black people, Native people, Latinx folks, Asian Pacific Islander folks, and white people in solidarity. And it's across projects, in particular here, people that are working on the Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies project and also our work with Standing Rock and Freedom Square. This next era of work as the Bank Center will foreground the project of educational justice for communities who have been and continue to be denied that justice. Educational justice, meaning the opportunity to teach and learn in ways that value and center the lifeways and very lives of communities. Educational justice being a project that understands and seeks to dismantle the ongoing legacies of U.S. settler colonialism, of land theft, genocide, and enslavement as they have pervaded education across the centuries to the present day. It is worth mentioning that what may be obvious to many of us in this room, not all work in education is educational justice work. Too often we are seduced to believe that because we are in the field of education, because we are educators, that we are automatically about justice or equity. No, one of the things schools are really good at is reproducing racialized capitalist inequality. Unless we are about disrupting and transforming and revitalizing what schools are and can do, not simply offering more access to the same violent structures and spaces, we are not about educational justice. Status quo research and practice like status quo schooling is a part of, not apart from, the damage that schools do. The Bank Center for Educational Justice seeks to become a central location for partnerships, program development, and collaborative research with early childhood through university educational settings that sustain Native, Black, Latinx, and Asian and Pacific Islander young people across Seattle and urban and rural Washington. Center projects will focus on the community-engaged support and design of learning settings, schools, community organizations, cultural institutions that sustain the valued lifeways of youth and families of color, the preparation and ongoing learning of educators in urban and rural, primarily indigenous serving learning settings across Washington, and collaborative partnerships between university and community-based artists, humanities, and social science scholars, educators, and early childhood through university students themselves. Across our work, we will be committed to 4 roots or anchors or core commitments. And let me say that these roots of the work exist in the context of what I defined as educational justice, exist within an understanding and resistance to settler colonial society, founded on beliefs in white, cis, heteropatriarchal, ableist, dominant, monolingual superiority. These are community engaged with community partners collaborating on all projects. These are transdisciplinary, with education and the arts and humanities leading. Also intersectional, with a focus importantly on racial justice, while attending to intersections with gender identity, disability ability, language, citizenship status, migration, land, and class. And as I mentioned intersectional work, it is important to cite the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, who Tyrone mentioned earlier, and other Black women, from Sojourner Truth to the Combahee River Collective, to Audre Lorde, who was on, Audre Lorde was like, yep, that's me, who was on Nicole Joseph's slide. This work, right, on the specific intersectionality of Blackness and womanhood, in ongoing oppression and also in a possible liberation. The work will also be coalitional, with a focus on distinct and similar projects for educational justice for Black, Native, Latinx, and Asian and Pacific Islander communities, recognizing, of course, that these communities are not mutually exclusive. Very fortunately for me, the center has many amazing folks to join who have been engaged in this long-term work that exemplifies these anchors or roots or core commitments. And this is not an exhaustive slide nor an adequate representation of folks' work and the multiple people involved in this work. From Megan Bang's work on the Native Education Certificate, and with Native young people, Indigenous knowledges, and STEAM with Filiberto Barajas Lopez, Joy Williamson's Lot's work on the relationships between Black social movements and higher education, Anne Ishimaru, Min-sun, and Filiberto's work on race and equity in Seattle public schools, and Anne's work with Joe Lott on parent and school collaborations, Joe's work with men of color here on campus, Monka Varghese work preparing and supporting multilingual teachers in local schools, Wayne Au's work in ethnic studies and understanding and resisting high-stake testing. And I'd also like to shout out Anthony Craig, like me, a new member of the work in the college, who has been at the work of leadership that sustains our communities for many years. And of course, the center looks to join the work of faculty beyond the College of Education, like creative writing faculty Ray Paris's poetic work on Black trauma, resistance, and rememory, or ethnic studies chair Juan Guerra's work on writing in communities of belonging. Juan was actually a mentor of mine many years ago, and the only time I had been to the University of Washington campus before my interview was as a fellow, when Juan was my mentor so many years ago, so it's wonderful to have him as a colleague here. It is this work, among the work of many others, in the College of Education and across campus and our communities that we will partner with as we seek to become a central location for educational settings looking to learn and teach for racial and intersectional justice. As I look at the beautiful work of my colleagues here in Seattle and across Washington, my own current work stays with me and feeds the commitments and the roots of the center as I learn in this new place. I'm thinking about my work with April Baker Bell and Davina Jackson, seeking to understand the value and work of our Black languages and lives with high school students in urban Michigan. This is the title of our new article, Learning Black Language Matters, Humanizing Research as Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy, where we build from 2 years of collaborative research to understand the ways teaching and research about Black language was part of and not apart from the larger Black Lives Matter movement. And here in this, the photo you see here, you see April, who grew up in Detroit. You see Davina, the first time she read Geneva Smitherman's Talking and Testifying, which helped her start to name the ways and push through some of the internalized shame that she had around her language from the ways that her teachers were treating her language. And then that other picture is me on my first trip to my father's, to where my father was born and raised, Kingston, Jamaica, and that's me with my grandparents, Mumums and Gumpy. And I remember on that trip learning so much about the relationship between language, race, and possible lives. And so this work of Black linguistic and literate lives is crucial to my own research, to the commitments we will have as a center, as it is crucial to my own life, having a Black immigrant father, a white mother raised in California, thinking about the meaning of home and land and who can move in what body through which spaces, educational spaces, and otherwise. These meditations on land and lives and homes bring me to thinking about our work in solidarity with the Miniwachoni Nakichijing Awayawa, that's the Defenders of the Water School, which served children for several months at Ocheti Shakoing Camp at Standing Rock, and which held another gathering at Standing Rock, which we were grateful to attend last fall in 2017, to continue the indigenous resurgence of sovereignty, treaty rights, sacred sites, and a livable planet for all people. This is a photo of Ray and me with school founder, Lakota health and education leader Elena Eagleshield, and teachers Blaze, Teresa, and Jose during our first visit to the school back in fall 2016. And we were grateful that time to be able to offer a visioning workshop around the goals of the school and link Defenders of the Water up with other indigenous serving schools in New Mexico and Arizona. And finally, as I think about some of this current work, I'm thinking about a book project that Elena Eagleshield, Ray Paris, and Ohio State professor Tim San Pedro and I are putting together with a collective of Black and Native youth, artists, activists, and scholars about education in movement spaces from Standing Rock to Chicago Freedom Square. And for those who don't know about Freedom Square, Black and brown community members held space for 40 days and nights outside the Homan Square site where Black and brown people had been tortured and disappeared for decades. They held that space for 40 days and 40 nights, and that included children, it included families, it included arts and education tents. This is a flyer from the beautiful session we held at last AERA. So academic publishing takes a moment. This was last AERA, but we're working on this project, we're committed to it. And in this session, we brought together scholars and community members who had taught and learned with young people in these movement spaces. As I mentioned movement spaces here through the examples of Standing Rock and Black Lives Matter, I should mention that these movements, as connected across the centuries to so many social movements, were and are founded and led by Black and Indigenous women and Indigenous and Black youth. In all of these current projects, I've come to understand our work in education as crucial to justice and liberation movements for the rights of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, immigrant, Muslims, women, trans and gender non-binary folks, people who speak languages other than English, folks with disabilities, and intersections of all of these. This latest ongoing wave of oppressive policies, and we've heard some about them today, and the beliefs that undergird them remind us that if we are to create and sustain a just, pluralist society, joining young people and families in the ongoing work of educational justice is key. As Ibram X. Kendi argues in the 2016 National Book Award-winning nonfiction Stamped from the Beginning, The History of Racist Ideas in America, the trajectory of racist progress has always run parallel to the trajectory of racial progress. And I think we heard Linda talk about that some, those 2 steps forward and sometimes 2 steps back kind of idea. And we are certainly seeing that today. Given this context, I offer that we must understand all education as happening in movement spaces. Indeed, from a historical perspective, this has always been the case, with nation-state schools and colleges largely reproducing raced, class, gendered, and languaged and so-called abilitied inequality, and committed educators working in opposition to this status quo, working to build the world we need, one classroom, one school, one district, one community at a time, often in coalition with other educators, schools, community, and importantly, sometimes at least, university-based scholars. This leads me to preview a few of the things we have coming in the next year, all of which align with the roots of our work and with researching and teaching that joins social movements. So continuing in the tradition of the Center for Multicultural Education, we will host 2 book talks next year. The first by Joy Williamson-Lott, who will share her new book, which is out in June. Is Joy in here? I think I saw you. Yes, out in June, so get those pre-orders in. The book is called Jim Crow Campus, which, according to the publisher, quote, explains how the Black freedom struggle and the anti-Vietnam War movement dovetailed with faculty and student activism in the South to undermine the traditional role of higher education and to bring about social change, and, quote, helps institutional leaders to understand the benefits and challenges of dissolving the walls around the ivory and ebony tower, end quote. I think you can see the ways Joy's book and research offer us so much in this work. And let me also say that the critical study of history has always been a key facet of social change, and it will be a key facet of our work in the center. And the critical study of people's histories, of course, has been vital to the work of ethnic studies, an ongoing movement that is sweeping Seattle and other Washington public schools, as it has across the West Coast, the Southwest, and across the broader nation. Our second book talk will be with Wayne Au, Jesse Hagopian, Dylan Watson, and their youth community and educational partners to celebrate the just-released Teaching for Black Lives, which, as the publisher's site shares, has this goal, quote, Black students' minds and bodies are under attack. We're fighting back, end quote. Wayne's book talk will also include his forthcoming book on the ethnic studies movement. Distinguished visiting scholars is another tradition we will work to continue, and this summer's scholar, Gloria Latson-Billings, is a perfect choice in so many ways, for so many reasons, so thank you so much for your work and inviting Gloria out here and having her agree to come out here one more time, Jim. This includes Gloria's extraordinary career and contributions, her time as a master's student here at the University of Washington in the College of Education, her many visits to the Center for Multicultural Education, and the ways in which, in her words, quote, culturally sustaining pedagogy uses culturally relevant pedagogy as the place where the beat drops, end quote. When I read that, I was like, my career is over. I'm good. Just hang them up right there. I'm looking forward to joining Gloria for a session or two in her class this summer, and please stay tuned for who will join us in fall 2019. And we will have gatherings, of course. One that I'm working to host sometime in our first 2 years is a gathering on Indigenous and Black education, bringing local and national educators and scholars committed to education with Indigenous and Black communities together to continue to build mutually enriching understanding and solidarity across research, theory, and practice. The last initiative I've been working on since I learned that I would be taking on this role is a consortium of centers who are committed to racial and cultural justice through education. Among the early members of our emerging collective are Sandy Grande with the Center for Critical Study of Race and Ethnicity at Connecticut College, Maisha Wynn and Tori Wynn with the Transformative Justice and Education Center at UC Davis, Sean Harper with the USC Race and Equity Center, and Ibram X. Kendi with the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. I'm learning so much from these folks about the possible work of the center and our possible collaborations. And our goal is to learn with each other toward collective impact and toward the development of the next generations of leaders in the work. So these are just some of the ideas we are working on rolling out this year in the years to come. And I look forward to seeing you all as we formally launch the center in fall 2018. So I'd like to return to that art that graced the first slide of my talk. And we are so grateful again that Fabiana Rodriguez agreed to let us use this piece, which again is called "We're Building the World We Need." When H. Samuel Leem and I saw this piece, we knew it represented much of what we were trying to do in the book. And I'm thinking now how it represents so much of what I hope to do with the Banks Center for Educational Justice. This is in many ways not surprising, as the arts, particularly the arts as a form of resistance and revitalization, have been central across my own life. I was a poet before I was a teacher, and my father was a hand drummer with the Vukani Mwetu, an Oakland-based South African freedom choir, when I was coming of age. I should also mention that we have found the visual, written, and performing arts to be a vital facet of the culturally sustaining learning settings our collective has researched globally for many years. And I think we heard that earlier too, when we were talking about music. Indeed, art will be a core part of our work for social change through education, as it has always been in social and cultural change movements. As Jeff Chang has written in his research looking at the role of art in ideologies and policies about race over the last 50 years, cultural change precedes political change, and art has always been key to cultural change. Those of us in Miller Hall have recently felt the power of art to transform educational space, to anchor our teaching and learning and research in relation with Indigenous presence and lifeways. With the installation this week of this beautiful mural painted by an intergenerational group of artists, Roger Fernandez, Toma Villa, and Leah Ward, and huge thanks to all who worked for this to happen, including Megan Bain, Elizabeth West, and the support of Dean Mia Tuan. I know art has also been fundamental to James and Cherry Banks' life and work. I've talked with Jim about the Indigenous art and other work that graces the covers of his books and reports. And I know there is a great artist, the Black painter Jacob Lawrence, whose work is particularly important to James and Cherry Banks, as they knew Lawrence and his family during his many years on the faculty at the University of Washington and living here in Seattle. Ray and I have cherished hearing these stories of Jacob Lawrence. When I first heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, I want to hear more. Tell me these stories. And about how the Banks have a special affinity for Lawrence's John Brown series, a series that is so much about coalition and revolutionary racial justice movements. And I think we could look to that series to answer some of the questions we were coming up against earlier, or to think about some of the questions we were coming up against earlier in terms of solidarity. This is the third panel from another series, the epic 60-panel migration series, Lawrence's seminal meditation on the great migration of Black people from the rural South to the urban North. And of course, a second wave of this migration would bring Black folks out west to Los Angeles, to the Bay Area, and to Seattle. And this is number 58 in the series, a piece that explicitly references the possibilities of education, as these three Black girls reach up and up figuring possible futures across a chalkboard, or is that the sky? Art, migration, place, and educational justice. James and Cherry Banks' journey here from Michigan those many years ago, and my and Ray's journey here also from Michigan these decades later. Our family's migrations from the rural South, from New Orleans, from Jamaica, and many other places, always on and arriving on Indigenous land. The Banks Center for Educational Justice seeks to join the work of so many across these generations and into the many future generations to come. And so I'd like to end not only looking forward to the next era of the center, but meditating deeply about what the center and James Banks as founding director have offered this community. And so if you could take just a moment to turn to a person next to you and share a story or a memory you have about the center or about James Banks as a professor, as director. And that could be a story of something you learned at the center, a story. People are like, okay, we get it. We want to hear this. We want to share the stories. So go ahead, share the stories. Someone next to you, share a story. Not an All right. So, all right. So we could probably, maybe we just should. Is the wine coming in now? No. Just keep telling stories, right? And it was just beautiful to see how quickly those stories erupted, you know. And I know, I'm sure many of them also brought up the contributions of so many extraordinary people here, including Geneva Gay. And I wanted to give Geneva Gay a hand. people were, you get to go out there and join Jim Banks and Geneva Gay? Man, what'd you do to deserve this? And I was like, I don't really know, but I'm going to do it. So I thought it might be nice if a few people wanted to raise those stories to the group. And so if you'd like to tell a story or share a memory that's not too long, you don't need a dissertation, but I would really value hearing that. And so we have a mic here. Anybody want to share a story about kind of what came up when you thought of that, what you've really valued about James Banks as director, about the center, about his contributions, and the contributions of the center over time?
So my name is Mary. I teach in the Early Childhood and Family Studies degree here in the college. And long ago, when I was an undergrad at Iowa State University, I think there's somebody else who named that place today. I was an undergrad and I was taking my courses in child development, and there was this new thing, multicultural education, led by Dr. James Banks. And he has been a piece of my thinking about working with young children for decades. And then I got to come here and talk with him in the hall or be a colleague with him. And I just want to acknowledge the history I have with you that you may not have known.
I'm Margaret Maguire from Seattle University, and we talk a lot about Jim's role in multicultural education, but he really started in social studies education. And I'm forever grateful to him because when he was president of the National Council for the Social Studies, and I was a new young professor, I was in the House of Delegates, and I don't know if you remember this, Jim, but they were asking for leadership positions in the House of Delegates, and you came off the podium and came over to me and said, Margaret, you should do this, and that started me down that road for leadership positions, and I am so very grateful, so thank you.
Two very quick things. I think with all the acknowledgments people have made today, the one that we have not acknowledged is that very few people in the academy have actually created a field, and I think Jim Banks has done that. And the stories that Karen and I were talking about were about how absolutely wonderful and caring Jim and Cherry have always been to all of us who've been around them.
Hi, I'm Sue Austin, an old friend of Cherry and Jim's, a colleague and a friend. I'm just glad Jim is in this transition period because my bookshelf can't take any more books by Jim Banks.
Hello, my name is Yiting Shu. I teach at the University of Louisiana at Monroe. I'm a former student of Dr. Banks. I graduated a couple of years ago. So my cherished moment and memory of him was when I first got here in 2012. I was brand new and moved from Texas. It was my first week in Seattle, and he and Cherry invited me to their house for a barbecue. That's the first time I met many wonderful people here, Renee, Tao, and Nicole here, and we became friends and colleagues ever after that. So I feel very grateful to have a mentor and advisor who opened his home for his students and mentees. I don't think it's very common in academia, so I'm very grateful to that. Thank you.
So I was telling my department, I'm Christine Schaefer from Western Washington University, and I was telling my department that I was coming to a speech you gave a few weeks ago because I'd known you for about 30 years, but I think it's 40. We couldn't possibly be that old. But Jim and Cherry Banks have been a big part of my academic life and social life for a long time. But I would like to thank you for the encouragement you've always given to people coming into fields of young people. I got a call at home one night from you, and you said, would you please write the literacy chapter for my social studies book? It's like, I felt a little bit like I'd been canonized. It's like it was one of the biggest honors of my life, and thank you.
I missed you 2 other times, so it's definitely your turn. Third time's the charm. My name is Scott Macklin. Between 2003 and 2009, I served as the Chief Technology Officer for the college. And when I got recruited in during the interview, the dean at that time, Pat Wasley, asked me, do you think you can get Dr. Banks to use PowerPoint? So I spent several hours in his office teaching him PowerPoint, and because we're on camera, I probably won't share some of the language, but it was an interesting reciprocal sort of teaching and learning experience. And the other short story is both, Dr. Banks and Cherry just live down the hill from where we live in Shoreline, and every now and again, I'll be in Costco and I'll see Dr. Banks, and I'll sneak a hot dog with him, and he'll say, shh, don't tell anybody, but it's a wonderful dog. So sorry for outing you on that one. Thank you so much.
I'll go. Hold on, I want to say something. So, Dr. Banks, 3 years ago, you accepted me into the program, and I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, or this kind of family of scholars that I have a duty to kind of uphold a standard now. But what I've noticed in my 3 years with you is that you touch people in a way that changes their lives. That you give people, you always say you have to teach people how to know, to care, to act, and to make a difference. But you do that to your students, to the people who work in our school. The dignity and grace that you go about your job every single day is the thing that I've learned the most from you, and has changed my life and made me a better person. So thank you, Dr. Banks.
Hi, there's so much. My name's Daphne Blanca de Bach, and I have the pleasure of having the office right next to Dr. Banks since I arrived here in 2010. And I could certainly tell stories about knowledge construction, and over the years, and I have my own copy that I can also share, just like Django had his essay of reading your work long before I knew you in person. And there's so many stories I could share about your persistent, consistent, relentless, in a beautiful way, attention to knowledge construction as a deep vein that runs throughout your work. But what I will share about as your suite mate and being right next door to you is this other kind of relentless attention to consistency. And there's a quality of consistency in your discipline. There's a discipline, whether it's with your writing or your swimming. The comments in passing, oh, I must leave right now so that I go to swim, which is also such a wonderful model for younger scholars to know that you have to take care of your body as well. But also, the other thing I'll share is your suite mate. We might chat in passing as you come back from Washington, D.C., or Greece, or Singapore, or any of your numerous travels. And I have so enjoyed over the years hearing these tidbits about your travels from around the world, that it always struck me, whenever you would come back from the National Academy of Education from a meeting in D.C., the hours of invisible service, the service that many of us do not see, and what you have contributed, especially in thinking about mentorship and your work on committees and all of the behind-the-scenes work. But your discipline has been so obvious to me, and your consistency and depth, and it's just really amazing, and I've so enjoyed sharing the space with you in that suite. So, and thank you also for all of the opportunities that you've provided for me too. I've so benefited in so many ways.
How you doing? My name is Greg Diggs. I'm a doctoral student in the College of Ed. When I first came in 2013, there's one of the classes that we take, one of our prereqs for research, and we had to introduce scholars in our department. And Dr. Banks was one of them. There was only 3 black males in my cohort when I came in. So a lot of us were really kind of afraid of Dr. Banks because it's like, this is Dr. Banks, like, here he is. So I introduced him. I wrote a poem called Founding Father, which kind of recognized all of his contributions that we're recognizing here today. And in that 1 hour, I got 3 hugs from Dr. Banks. And it really set, I think for me and amongst the other brothers that were in the class with me, it kind of changed how we saw him. We saw him even more personal because he is Dr. Banks. So I just like to recognize that from that moment on, he's been really inspirational to me as well as the other. I can't speak for all the other brothers in the College of Ed, but for a lot of us, we do look up to Dr. Banks. So thank you.
Hi, similar. My name is Audra Doddy. I finished in the College of Education PhD primarily with Geneva Gay, but part of like personalization. I think one of my most wonderful memories is when I had my most personal conversation with Dr. Banks, and I had finished my master's in educational psychology, and I was going to go teach in Compton, Tyrone's old district. And Dr. Gay said, make sure you go by and you make an appointment with Dr. Banks and let him know what you're doing. And during that conversation, I was nervous because I didn't want you to be disappointed. We kind of knew each other, but not really. And I told you I was taking time off, and that was the same time you told me your youngest daughter had also either had just taken time off or was considering it or was getting ready to. And we just had a nice personal conversation. And from that point on, I came back from teaching and I joined the curriculum and instruction program, did my PhD, and squarely situated myself in multicultural ed. And so I want to just tell you that you were a big part of having the College of Ed be about stellar scholarship. We couldn't cut corners, as Dr. Gay said, but you were a part of making every student feel like it was a family. I look around with Ed Taylor and Nancy Beating, Walter Parker, Geneva Gay, of course, but you were a part of helping the students who came through know that we were a family. And Dr. Cherry Banks, you were a surrogate mother. You knew who we were when you would come. You always smiled. So thank you for sharing a little bit about your daughter's story and sharing a little bit more about you personally and making the College of Ed feel like a family for all students who came through.
Last one.
My name is Omri Tazza here. I'm currently at the University of Basel in Switzerland. I happen to grow up in Switzerland, but I'm a mixed-race person without any Swiss origins. I was the research assistant at the center for 2 years and then an employee in terms of just a continuation of the research assistancy. And what struck me is something that I carry forward in terms of Cherry Banks's and Jim Banks's work is the commitment to graduate students, to see that in a Center for Multicultural Education, there's 2 or 3 graduate assistants. The coaching, the mentoring, aside from the scholastic work, which is central and key, which I carry forward to students I taught for a long time in multicultural education and similar, it continues. But most importantly to me, and my biggest thank you, is the commitment to international students, to students of color, to students of all different types of backgrounds, and the commitment to cultivating support to graduate students. And it's something that I carry forward to young people, and I wouldn't be able to do so if I hadn't experienced it through both of your extreme commitments. So thank you very much.
Those were just absolutely beautiful. It makes me think of the... Oh, of course.
Excuse me.
Are you trying to say that you know that I'm verbose? I'm not going to say anything to repeat what you've already said other than ditto. But what I would like to share about you is something that I think I see myself as being fortunate. Oh, I'm Geneva Gay. I forgot about that. Fortunate because in some ways, I have the luxury of having a peekaboo look at Jim. And notice I did not say Dr. Banks, Jim, that a lot of other public people don't know. And for me, the other part of you that is so delightful is you are an incredible dad. I was able to be on the sidelines to watch you mentor and to father and to parent your two beautiful daughters. So in addition to the professor, I just wanted to say thank you personally.
I'm not going to tell a story because that's just a beautiful way to end Geneva. As we close this 30th symposium, please join me by giving James and Cherry Banks and the Center for Multicultural Education our deepest and ongoing thanks.